Hi, welcome to Dublin Tech Talks podcast in association with Workhuman. In our podcast, you'll listen to thought leaders, technologists and founders, and we'll bring their stories to you. On this episode, we are speaking with Helen Cahill, who is co-founder and CEO of InvoiceFair. On the episode, we're going to talk about the business, Helen's journey, her EY Entrepreneur of the Year, and any advice she has for anybody looking to move along in their entrepreneur career. Hope you enjoy. So Helen Cahill from InvoiceFair, welcome to Dublin Tech Talks, our first one in the podcast studio, so welcome to the show.
Yay, great. Good morning, Dave. Good morning, Gavin. Great to be here.
Yeah, no, it's brilliant to have you finally in person and all that. So do you want to introduce us to InvoiceFair and the market that you serve?
Sure. So, I'm Helen Cahill. I'm co-founder of InvoiceFair, and I guess we are in the alternative funding space, focusing on working capital. So what we do is we provide growth funding for mid-sized companies that are scaling, or in more simple terms, we give companies money to spend on raw material, inventory, marketing, sales, labour, all the good stuff they need to scale. Mm-hmm. And we do that on the back of the strength of their receivables. And receivables really means their customers, the business that they win with their customers. We have a mechanism, a secret sauce, to translate that into upfront growth capital.
Yeah.
So if you think about Ireland, Ireland is full of SMEs or mid-sized companies that are selling goods or services to the large multinational sector. Across all the sectors, so whether it's pharma, medtech, tech, renewables, construction, retail, and all of these bigger guys have been stretching out their credit terms over the last number of years. So
absolutely.
If you're scaling and you have to wait 60, 90, 100, and in some cases over 100 days to get paid, that on the one hand is a challenge. Or indeed, if you're tendering for business with one of these big players, oftentimes the quantum of what you can tender for is determined by how much funding you can access to fulfill that order or fulfill that contract up front. So that might mean buying the raw material, employing the engineers to do the coding. And it's at that point in time, that's really where the customer pain point is. So we identified that, and I suppose as a business, we're obsessed with market failures. So a lot of our product innovation and solutions relate to the customer problem that we see out there in the marketplace.
Was the gap you saw the access to that funds or just the provision in general?
So the gap that we saw, if I go back to the genesis of InvoiceFair, I suppose, back in 2015, there was two things happening. Number one, banks and traditional providers who essentially have the same business model as a bank were, a lot of them were repairing their own balance sheets post-financial crisis. And the furthest thing in their mind was coming up with innovative solutions for mid-sized companies that was scaling, understandably. And simultaneously then, in the investment world, interest rates had been held up artificially, and they began to normalise. So even cash as an investment asset class was not attractive. But in the investment world, regulated credit funds were really focusing in on receivables. And again, for any listeners, receivables means invoices, sales orders, or your recurring revenue. Yeah. They were really focusing in on this asset class because, number one, it's short-dated. Number two, it's uncorrelated. It doesn't behave the same way as equities or bonds or currencies when there's a massive event. And also, they can construct a portfolio made up of the receivables from all the sectors I just mentioned, so very diversified. So those two things were happening simultaneously. And as we all know now, looking back over the last 5 years, technology is an enabler. So the genesis was identifying the fact that the players in the market in Ireland and the UK and beyond, because of all the bad things that happened, they weren't in a position to provide fit-for-purpose working capital. The funds in the investment world, there was a search for yield, I always call it. And technology could connect these two distinct audiences together. And that's really, that was the genesis, I suppose, of InvoiceFair, solving those two problems.
And it's been a big success, or it's been a success anyway to date. Over $1 billion funded, 40 staff. We'll talk about EY Entrepreneur of the Year nomination. Hopefully, when this goes out, you'll be the winner. You'll be able to parade your trophy around.
Yeah.
But it's how does that kind of success, or do you feel you've had success yet, or where's that at with yourself?
It's a bit like everything. People glamorize things from a distance. So, certainly we've done very well, and we have provided over 1.3 billion of funding to companies in Ireland and the UK predominantly, and we have innovated on product, and we have managed to build a really good team. But, hard yards, right?
Yeah.
And going back to the business model, and the innovation is connecting institutional funding with SMEs that want working capital. But you can't offer these innovative solutions without the institutional funding. And you can't get the institutional funding if you've nothing to deploy it into. So, that in essence was a challenge in the early days. I suppose Ireland now and globally, we've seen technology gallop ahead in terms of even how people are living their lives now. You're revoluting money to your kids, unfortunately. You're
or just
always
give them
on
a card
tap.
and as you get the requests.
Yeah, so the degree to which we had to, even initially what we were doing was very innovative then, where now that's a ticket to the game. But keeping on top of the technological innovation, understanding the importance of data. So if I look at how we dealt with customers back in 2015 and how we would now prospect, onboard and manage customers, it's very, very different. And technology is much more at the heart of that. Why? Because we're in the underwriting business. And in order to make safe underwriting decisions, you need data. So we integrate with a customer's open banking, with their accounting system. We use all those tools and data to monitor them. So there's been a big, big change.
Would you call yourself a technology business now or a finance business?
That's a great question. So I used to always, we've a lot of accountants in our business. My co-founder is a chartered accountant, albeit that he spent his career in industry. So we're very thin, heavy, if you like. But I suppose more recently, and Gavin, you should know this because we worked together in trying to headhunt the right CTO. We have digitized the journey for the customer. We have focused in on an API first approach and trying to ingest all this data that we need to inform the decisions we make in a much less frictionless way. So over the last 12, 18 months, there's been more emphasis on the tech side of the fin, but our IP is the knowledge we have, the experience we have, the way in which we can assess risk and the mitigants of risk. And yes, we will codify elements of that, and we have a rules engine, but we're not going to become an automated underwriting business because equally, the experience that the underwriting team have is also very important, and relationship.
That's why people buy from you.
And relationships with customers. But I think I forgot to make a point that I was trying to make earlier there, just when you asked me a question. There's been a huge part of education and what we've had to do. So Irish people, and our decision maker is the MD or FD or financial controller. That persona is quite conservative. Now, with the new younger cohort coming up, but they might be wary of technology. They might be wary of being asked to integrate their accounting system or their bank. They might be wary that, if they were to move from one of the traditional providers to InvoiceFair, are we going to be around? Is there certainty of funding? What does fintech mean? In 2015, that was a much bigger conversation than it is today. But we had to walk that walk and educate our audience. And what's happening globally, and the disruption in the sector globally, and it being further disrupted now by things like banking as a service and embedded finance, has helped us because now people are more aware and there's less education to do, and they're less fearful of actually doing something which, to my mind, is very prudent, which is diversifying your funding mix and not having your eggs in any one basket. And for us, InvoiceFair, we excel in the area of working capital. We're not term funders. We don't do senior debt.
Yeah.
We're not doing asset finance. You know, we're very clear on our sweet spot and what we're good at.
And have you defined as part of that education program that it's raising the awareness of how you can access funds in a different way, and you know you can protect your ownership in your company or your long term finances over that short term access? Like, was there much work to do educating the business community that they could operate in a different way?
Absolutely. And if I could turn the clock back, I'd probably take a different approach to that. I'd be sitting here in this studio running a podcast. But I suppose our strategy was to focus in on the key influencers. And in our addressable market, the key influencers are accountants who have very trusted relationships with companies and are probably likely to be told if there's a working capital challenge. Other advisors, but definitely accountants, corporate finance houses, VCs. So we focused in on targeting and educating that cohort that engage directly rather than trying to engage each customer, each prospect block by block. I suppose as a company, though, we didn't, and I know others have done it, we didn't get on the radio and advertise in that sort of way. So it was much more a founder-centric, like I and my co-founder, Peter Brady, spent a lot of time in the early days wearing shoe leather and getting out there doing these panel discussions, presenting to accountancy firms, etc.
And when did you realise you had a product? Like, when was, you kind of went, shit, we have something here. When was that?
Well, I suppose the first transaction we did is we funded a company that were putting tradespeople on the ground in the Nordics. So it was a Swedish krona based transaction, which my background would be in the whole area of currency risk management. So that was not a challenge, thankfully. But I suppose when you saw the speed at which and the quantum of funding that we could deliver in a way that was so frictionless, and that was our first trade. Yeah. We really were then convinced of the market opportunity, cognizant of the requirement to have a very deep funding mix, though, because clearly, for all the reasons we know, in terms of that education piece, we did need to reassure companies that we would be able to be their funding partner in the working capital space. But it was very early on that we realised the market's crying out for this, because the choices that they have in the market presently do not mirror their ambition in terms of where they want their company to go, where they want to scale. There's a mismatch between the risk appetite of traditional providers and the structure of traditional providers, where they're limited by being a single balance sheet lender. Their regulatory framework precludes them from being able to do things that we can just do because of our model. So I pretty much immediately we saw that we can do things that others can't, or we can do what they do differently in a very compelling way. And I don't want that to sound arrogant, because there was still, but there was never, oh my God, like, do people really want fast, flexible working capital?
That was a question answered already.
Yeah. So, but there's still fear and trepidation when you're a founder, as to how you're actually going to scale and win more customers and win more funders. And, so it was not without its challenges.
As you've touched on I'm very interested in the founder experience. You mentioned lots of different backgrounds and profiles around your leadership, table. And there's different yardsticks and measurements of your success. Clearly, Gavin mentioned the amount of funding that has been released is phenomenal. But as an individual, as a founder, where do you get your drive from? Is it seeing the customers that you enable and how their businesses thrive and grow, or are you just focused more on those more core metrics around the finance?
I think that as a person, and my career, albeit that it was on the treasury side of banking, quite traditional, it was very people intensive. I managed large teams. I worked with large teams, and a lot of those teams are now really good buddies of mine. Yeah. So I thrive in an environment where I work with really good people. The other thing that I would find hugely rewarding is solving a problem for a customer and being able, like maybe it is a competitive side to me. You know, being able to solve a problem that others can't, that makes me feel good. It makes me feel like we've actually made a difference here.
Yeah.
This has been able to deliver this, has acted as a catalyst for that company to be able to do something that they otherwise couldn't do.
Yeah.
And yeah, that would drive me as a person for sure.
And then the opposite of that, what keeps you awake at night as a founder, as Helen? You wake up and go, oh no, this has to be done. Is there?
Yeah, well, I suppose a number of things. I suppose, you know, making sure in the early days that we had the depth of funding. And if you go back to my earlier point that funders like the asset class, but you need to have the companies that need the working capital.
Yeah.
So that kept me awake at night. Are we going to be able to win business and retain business? So, you know, that's always a worry for a business in any competitive environment. I worried a lot about our people during COVID. I think it was a very, very challenging time, and literally our customers back in 2020, a lot of them just shut up shop. They didn't need funding because they were being supported by government and government supports and revenue supports. And in fairness, I was absolutely blown away by the degree to which the team, all of them, worked remotely immediately, leaned in, down tools and went, okay, what are we going to do here? We need to think about how we're going to keep our business alive. So we identified e-commerce funding, where we provide funding to companies to pay for inventory on the back of their future sales. We identified PPE, where loads of Irish companies were getting these absolutely enormous orders from the HSE, the NHS, and the bank model couldn't bank it. They were too big. So in fairness, we worked with the banks and a lot of the other providers, which was really rewarding, where competition didn't matter. Everybody was aligned in being able to get PPE out to people who weren't vaccinated at this stage. So we funded about 80 million of that. And then we also got into, which is very topical now, another crisis in Ireland, housing, social and affordable houses. So we, again, there are able to provide funding earlier on and possibly more than the competition. So we dipped into that. But that, even though, you know, so it made people very busy, there was huge deadlines, but it really, in terms of their mental health, was brilliant because we worked together really hard. You know, we did good business. It was profitable business. It solved a serious problem. All these businesses that had to go online, people still need housing, and then people needed PPE. So to me, but worrying about people, and I don't have to tell anybody more than you guys, looking after your people is number one.
Yeah,
you know,
it has to be.
It is. They're at the centre. And, you know, these days people talk about employee experience. And, you know, I don't know much about employee experience other than in our business, people are front and centre, and you have to be able to, you know, communicate and listen to your people and understand, you know, possibly even what's going on outside of their work life, because that could be hugely impacting.
Yeah, the whole person is so important now. I mean, you know, it's the conversation is front and centre, and there is no separation. So, you know, in a way that perhaps there was in the past.
Yeah, like people saw into your house and everything like that for 2 years. It was, you know, there's your children walking behind you. You know, before that it was like, get out of the room. You know, and then it was like, come on in. So like,
it's been great.
Yeah, it has. That's been, everybody's more personable. I remember starting off and you did the 360 reports and you had that work face and your home face and that type of stuff. I don't know if it's because I'm a bit older now, but I don't have a work and a home face. I'm very much who I am. But I think that's kind of resonated with a lot of people, and knowing them outside of work or asking that question, especially during the 2 years of COVID, was, you know, how is everything? And people were like, oh, thank God you asked. Nobody's asked me, you know, because I'm talking to the same people for 2 weeks.
It was very intense. And I mean, during that time we had, you know, as a business, we've lost parents, we've lost, you know, we've had people who got married, we've had people who've had babies, you know, all in, you know, 10 people going to a funeral, like very, very difficult circumstances that'll stay with them for quite a while, actually.
Yeah, 100%.
So, so I'm very strong on people. On the hybrid and all of that, I think, you know, one of the privileges I had was to go on a trip with EY and the finalists to the US. And we spent a wonderful morning in Dell, and it was absolutely inspirational, all the different speakers. But the one glaringly obvious observation I made was that the car parks were empty.
Yeah.
And it's this massive, massive monster in the middle of the city, Austin. And logically, that's not a sustainable position either. So, and some people from the floor asked the question, and, the company line was, but the economic stats not going to stack up indefinitely in terms of paying for that type of enormous retail or office space and nobody being there a lot of the time.
I think that's going to be a topic for the next 12, 24 months as businesses struggle with what is right. There's offices being paid for. You're kind of, do I bring my staff in? Staff get pissed off. Yeah. Do they stay? Do they go? Is it a business that you can talk to and say, I really like working here, but I don't want to be doing that?
Yeah, it's a consequence of that extension, putting the human first. I mean, that makes decisions very personal, but it's hard to write a policy for for everyone's personal decisions. So I think that there's a give and take, and I think organizations need to decide what's important to them as well as what's important to the employee, and hopefully things marry up, and some businesses are happy with fully remote, partially remote.
Exactly.
Other companies want to double down on that connection. I mean, some of the Workhuman IQ that our teams produce from our customer data is like people are connected more to the people around them than the company culture, because it's obvious the people are the embodiment of that culture. So if you look at people entering the workforce now for the first time in a fully remote world, what learning by osmosis are they getting? What coaching? So no one has an answer.
Yeah, I could be here for an hour now. But personally,
we only have 5 more minutes.
You're going to have to cut this bit out of the podcast. I'd have strong views on. I think there's a degree of learned behaviour that took place during that 2-year period, and I think that ultimately, and again, my career has been in very people-intensive environments and high-performance teams. I think that there is a huge amount of learning through osmosis that if you're sitting in the office. Also team building. A lot of the people I worked with in my 20s are really good pals of mine. My old management team when I was in banking are people who are very much in my life now, who I trust and really like because I developed a relationship with them in work. And I think that that in itself is very enriching. And it's a richer learning environment when you're sitting right beside people, and particularly in a smaller organisation like ours where you have people maybe that aren't that experienced being able to work really closely with people that are seriously experienced. So it's like supercharging somebody in terms of their learning curve.
For sure, yeah.
So, but clearly I would also not impose anything on anybody, and we do work hybrid. But if you want my view on it, what would I like? I'd like everybody to be in the office 5 days a week because I think it'd be a better place, better buzz, better relationships and deper learning.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't disagree with that, but
I think
I hate going to the office. I hate the journey in. I hate the journey home.
I think when you look at retention now, tenure as a consequential metric of looking at your attrition data is really important. I think if you start to see trends where fully remote or people who've joined recently are leaving quicker. Against a cohort of people who are...
You see them within 2 years putting their hands up because they've never met anybody in the office.
Yeah.
Like, that was so obvious when you're looking around to find people. They're like, I was here for 2 years, kind of got what I needed. I'm going to go. I have no loyalty. Don't even know who the CEO is or the MD. I've met my manager once, I
think the experience is important as well. You can't just get people in to have people in. They have to see value in coming to the office, collaborating, connecting with people. I think it's about that connection experience. If you can unlock that.
Absolutely. It's not just being there for the sake of it. For sure.
Wanted to ask you 2 things. Female founder, CEO, how was that journey? Did you, and one of our speakers today found it pretty difficult as a female founder to raise funds. They still saw it as risky. Did you find any of those problems?
We should have definitely given you more than 3 minutes for this one. But
I think, age 20, I started my career in a dealing room in a bank, and I was the first female. And maybe it's because of the journey I've had that I don't really attach importance to me being female, or indeed anybody being male or female. It's about the right person. And I think that now I did initially when we raised our equity, we got matched funding very thankfully from who are our great partners, Enterprise Ireland, under their HPSU programme. And I would have done the submission under the female-led.
Yeah.
So, I really don't think, I think it's about the credibility of the model and the scalability of it if you're raising funds and the degree to which you can convince your audience that. So whether you're male or female, I really don't think it matters. Now, again, going back to the people thing, do I know that there are customers that we have that prefer to deal with my male colleagues? Absolutely. And we joke about it openly in the office that that's not going to work. I'll step out, you run with this. And then equally, there are those that love dealing with women. So it's horses for courses. And I really don't get too hung up on it.
Perfect. Last question. I have loads of other questions. Could be here for another half an hour. Your future founders, other people looking to start on their own, what's your advice or what's their pitfalls to avoid if they were sitting in front of you? Yeah,
well, I listen to a lot of podcasts myself when I run, and I've listened to ones where there's been advice like don't bootstrap it, go to market early, raise money. My own view is that don't bootstrap it, but equally don't raise such large money that then it changes the behaviours around how that money is spent, i.e. you wouldn't do what you did had you not had raised that.
If you have 10 million in the bank,
exactly, it does drive certain behaviours. So I think there's a happy medium around having the courage to raise enough money to get really strong people in key positions. So I'd attach huge importance to that and mind those people. And that means being an absolute black belt in communication and listening, to my mind.
Yeah, I love that saying. Going to rob that one, black belt in communications. Helen Cahill, CEO, co-founder of InvoiceFair. Thanks a mil for your time. It's really a pleasure to talk to you and best of luck. Is it Thursday?
Wednesday.
In the EY finals.
Pleasure, Gav and Dave. Thanks so much. Thanks a million. Cheers. Bye.
David here. Thanks again, folks, for joining us. There you have it. So I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to subscribe to whatever platform you're engaging with the content on. You can also find us on LinkedIn. Also check out our meetup page because we are getting back to in-person events. So we look forward to seeing you in person at one of them, or certainly bringing more content and telling some more stories from the tech scene in Dublin. Thank you.